In the book of Zechariah, there's just one little statement that I want to talk about tonight. Years ago, I read this, and I thought that it was kind of an unusual thing. He asked the question, who has despised the day of small things? As I was preparing this lesson, I ran into an Aesop fable. I want to read it to you. I'm sure you've heard it before, but I'm going to read it to you just as it was written by the old Greek man named Aesop. Once when a lion was asleep, a little mouse began running up and down upon him, and soon it wakened the lion. He placed his huge paw over him, opened his big jaws, and was about to swallow him. "Pardon, O king," cried the little mouse. "Forgive me this time. I shall never forget it. Who knows but what I may be able to help you in turn someday in the future." The lion was so tickled with the idea that a little mouse would be able to help him, he lifted up his paw and he let the mouse go. Sometime after that, the lion was caught in a trap, and the hunters who desired to carry him alive to their king tied him to a tree while they went in search of a wagon to bring him back to the king. Just then, the little mouse happened to pass by. Seeing the sad plight of this lion, the king of the jungle, he went up to him and soon gnawed away the ropes that bound the lion to the tree. And he turned to the king of beasts and he said, "Was I not right?" And that's the end of the story. Small things. You don't think of a mouse helping out a lion, and yet all of us have our little places. We are living at a time when we use superlatives. It's the biggest. It's the best. It's the longest. It's the shortest. It's all, spectacular. And that's kind of the way our culture is. My oldest son, when we were living in Texas and I was going to school, we were there at Christmas time, and he won an electric train. Well, my wife really put the thing into the drawing, and surely enough, we won it. So we were going to give it to Steve for a big part of his Christmas present. And we set the whole thing up, and it was real nice, and it had a treadle and, all of this sort of thing. And, it was just great. Well, the little boy next door, he and Steve were good friends. And Christmas morning, the little boy came over, and we were outside, and they were talking. "What'd you get for Christmas?" "Oh, I got a train." "I got a train, too." And he said, "But mine," this little boy next door, he says, "Mine's a real train." My dad said, "Mine's a real train, too." So he said, "Come on in and see my train." And the little boy next door, he looked at it and he said, "Your train is realer than my train." Because Steve's train was just a little bit bigger than his train. Well, we're trained, shall we say, in that way. We are a society of superlatives. We like big things. We like spectacular things, like I was mentioning. There are so many things in the Bible that are seemingly insignificant that turned out to be very, very important. When I was preparing this, the first thing that came to me was David and Goliath. David and Goliath. I mentioned David and Goliath this morning, but David is a shepherd boy. He doesn't have a weapon. He doesn't have a sword. And here this giant Goliath had been challenging the people all along. Every day he'd come out and say, send somebody out here to fight me. I'm bigger than they are. You won't be able to overcome me. You won't be able to kill me. Just send them out. But I'll tell you what, if your man kills me, the Philistines will become your servants. If we kill him, then you become the servants of the Philistines. Scared them to death. Just scared them to death. David came along and said, what's going on here? David had just come out there to bring some food to his brothers who were in the army. And what's going on here? There's none of your business. This is the big thing. We've got to take care of this. But everybody was scared to death. David said, what's going on? And they said, well, here's what happened. And David said, why hadn't somebody challenged him? And, you know, they didn't say this exactly this way, but basically they said, David, get lost, you know. David says, I'll go out there and fight that man. You don't have a sword. And Saul heard about this, and Saul says, here, put my armor on. Well, you know, the Bible mentions that Saul was a great big guy. He was head and shoulders above anybody else. Put my armor on. Put that armor on this young shepherd boy, and he took it off. He said, I haven't tried this stuff out. I can't do this. Well, what are you going to do? Well, I've got a sling. I got a sling. And, you know, he went across this little brook. He picked up 5 little stones. And when he came walking out, Goliath had this same superlative idea. I'm bigger than you are. I'm stronger than you are. I've got a sword you don't have. Said, you think I'm a dog? You're coming out here to try and kill me? And David said, you come out here with me, against me with a sword and a spear and all that. He says, I'm coming out to you in the name of the Lord. I can imagine this. David puts the little rock in his sling, and this giant comes running at him, and David is you, bang. And you know, we don't realize this, but they had contests. Back in the old days, they had contests with shepherds that used slings. It's mentioned one time in the book in the Old Testament. It's mentioned one time, and it talked about how accurately the shepherds learned to use their slings. That's the way they protected their flock. If a wolf came up, if a lion came up, whatever, they could hit those animals right in the head and knock them out and kill them. And so that's exactly what he did with Goliath. Now stop and think about that. It only took one little stone to kill this great big giant. And it was something that all the rest of the people had overlooked. Sometime God can use the little things that we do to great advantage. How many of you have a telephone? Everybody's got a telephone, some kind of a telephone. A cell phone or a phone at home or whatever. Almost everybody has. We certainly all have access to telephones. Have you ever thought about, to think about, just pick up the phone and call somebody in the congregation, somebody who is doing something, somebody who is working in some kind of a project, just call it up and just say, hi, this is so-and-so. You know, I just wanted to call you and tell you thank you for what you're doing for the congregation. How long does that take? Doesn't take very long. I'll tell you what, that will make people feel so much better about what they're doing. And it's just a little bit like David and Goliath, I think, right along this line. There's another one. There was a fellow by the name of Shamgar. How many of you know who Shamgar was? Old Testament. Shamgar. You probably overlooked old Shamgar because there's only one verse in the Bible that says anything about him. But he was the judge of Israel. Shamgar took an ox goad, and in battle, Shamgar killed 600 Philistines with an ox goad. Well, an ox goad is just a stick, that they prod the oxen with and so forth as they're getting them to move along. We don't know anything about Shamgar. My guess is that for most of you here, you've never read about Shamgar. You don't remember him. Why? Well, because it's not a great big a great big thing about what all Shamgar did. And so we don't pay too much attention to it. But he was instrumental in moving the battle, winning the battle for Israel. And what he had here was an ox goad. You remember this old thing? It's been around a long, long time. For want of a nail, a shoe was lost. And for want of a shoe, a horse was lost. And for want of a horse, the battle was lost. All for want of a nail. So you see, little things can do big things when they're used properly. And when they're used in conjunction with others, there's just all kinds of very important things. How many of you knew that Paul had a nephew that's mentioned in the Bible? Have you ever heard? You never heard of Paul's nephew? Yeah, when Paul was in prison in Jerusalem, he came to Jerusalem. He was arrested, put in prison. The Jews literally hated Paul. They wanted to kill Paul. Then it mentioned just in a little paragraph there, it says, Paul's nephew, the son of Paul's sister. He heard about a plot that they had laid to kill Paul. And here's what it was. They were going to get Paul, hoax, they were going to get Paul transferred from the prison to the court. And as he was being transferred, there was a whole group of men, about 40 men, that were going to ambush this thing, and they were going to kill Paul. And Paul's nephew heard about this somehow, and he went to Paul, and he told Paul about it. Paul said, go to the commander and tell the commander all about this. If you want to read this little story, it's in the 23rd chapter of the book of Acts. But he went to the commander, and the commander listened to him. I think that in itself is kind of strange. The commander listened to him. And then the commander says, all right, don't you tell a soul about this. So what they did, because of this little boy, this nephew, because of this nephew coming and bringing that information, they transferred Paul that night. They transferred Paul from Jerusalem in the prison over to Caesarea. And that's the way Paul got to Caesarea and was tried over in Caesarea. So it all came about because Paul's nephew figured into this thing. Now, I don't know how old the nephew was. He may have been 10 or 12 years old, or he may have been 30 years old. I don't know. But the point is that here is a little incident. Didn't amount to very much, just a very small incident in the life of Paul that really just changed the whole orientation. They changed the whole story of Paul's work. Do you know that if the nephew had not been there, if the nephew had not turned in the information, we would not have the books of 1st and 2nd Timothy and Titus. We would not have the books of Ephesians, Philippians, and Colossians, because all of those were written either in Rome or after the Roman imprisonment. Just stop and think about what a great thing this nephew did, and yet there's almost nothing there to tell us about it. I want to tell you a personal story. You all know me well enough to know that I can tell a personal story, and nobody, I don't think, will be really offended by the fact that it's personal. There's a very, very small thing happened in my life when I was in high school. Very small thing. It totally changed my entire life. And I mean 100% changed my entire life. I'm not going to tell you the whole story. It's long and drawn out, but I am going to tell you some of the parts of it. During the war, I was getting ready to begin my senior year in high school. And my mom and dad went off on a trip to see my dad's brother up in Alabama. And while they were up there, well, I had some cousins and so forth up there, and they saw my cousins and so forth. And when they came back, I was talking to my mom about the trip. And I said, what about WG? WG was my cousin. I said, well, what about WG, and what about John Thomas, and what about this one and that one? And she began telling me, well, WG and John Thomas, they last year they went to school at a military academy, Columbia Military Academy, and Walter, my uncle, he said something. My dad said, it was a good school. Said you guys ought to send Jack up there. And so Mom said, you don't want to go to a military school, do you? And I said, well, I don't know, maybe that'd be good. So we investigated it, and they did. They sent me to a military school. Well, here's the thing. I was up for the draft, go in the Army or the Navy or Marine Corps or whatever it was. I had a good friend in high school. He joined the Marines. And he wanted me to join the Marines too, but I wanted to finish high school. And but then I went to this military school, and I learned a whole lot there. And by the way, it was a very good school, very, very strict, but that was good for me. I needed that. And I was going to join the Navy. Well, I got to be 18, and I had to register for the draft, and I had to decide really, what am I going to do? So here's what happened. My roommate had a picture of his brother, and he had a uniform on of some sort. And I asked him, I said, well, what branch of service is he in? He says he's a cadet in the U.S. Merchant Marine Cadet Corps. I said, what in the world is that? And we got to talking about the thing, and I ended up going into the Merchant Marine Cadet Corps and went to the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy. And I came out as an engineer. And then, this is real strange. If that conversation had not taken place, where my mom said, well, they sent my brother, my cousin to military school. If that conversation had not taken place, if she had not told me about that just in a casual conversation, I would never have gone to the U.S. Military Merchant Marine Academy. And I said my whole life would have been changed. It would have, because so much of my life came back to the fact that I had been here and there in this Merchant Marine and the overseas duty and all this sort of thing. And the lady that I married, I probably would never have married had it not been for that little conversation. I'm just saying this. Everything we do has significance to it. Don't think that any job that you're doing, any work that you're doing, anything that you say to somebody, don't think that that's the end of it. It's not the end of it. So, what can I say about that? Well, how about this? How about making it a point? How about just making it a point to be sure that you stop somebody tonight or next Sunday or whatever it might be, Wednesday night, whatever, stop somebody and just show some interest in them. I'd like to know more about your work. I'd like to know more about your family. I'd like to know more about you. I want to get to know you better. Everybody will think to themselves, well, that was really nice for him or her to ask me about. Friendships grow like that. That's the way friendships begin to be formed. So what am I going to do about this little thing? Am I just going to kind of chunk it away and forget about it? No, let's not do that. I want to tell you another story from the Old Testament. It's a story about Samson. We've all heard about Samson, and Samson did all kinds of things and so forth. Samson was, he was an erratic man. Samson acted on impulse a lot of times. Samson was not, he was not always a good kind of a fellow. There's some things about Samson that you would not really want to imitate, I think. But there was one time when Samson, he was in battle, and I don't know, I guess he didn't have anything around him to fight with, but there was a dead donkey over there. And he took the jawbone of this donkey, and he killed 1,000 Philistines, beating them to death with this jawbone of the donkey. Now stop and think about that. Just stop and think of how he used a little thing, and then, by the way, he made a little rhyme out of it with the jawbone of a donkey. He goes on and talks about in this little poem, just a couple of verses. Then he goes and talks about how with the jawbone of a donkey, I made a bunch of donkeys out of all of these men. And so that was the story of Samson. Now, let's stop for a moment and think, what can I do that would help somebody else? It doesn't have to be a big thing. What little thing can I do that would help someone else? Well, we're getting ready to have a potluck. How about calling Clarita or calling Emily? They are the two that really are putting this together, I think. How about calling them and just say, listen, I want to help any way I can. What is something that I can do that will help you personally, that will help you and make your load just a little bit lighter? Bear one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ. There are so many little things like that we pass over. We stop and think about the big things, but we lose sight a lot of times about the little things. Well, you remember the story of the widow's mite? How much was a mite, M-I-T-E, how much was a mite worth? Well, I looked it up because I didn't really know in dollars and cents and so forth. I didn't know what it was worth. I still don't know what it was worth, but I did find this out, a comparison. A mite, or two mites actually, two mites made the smallest Roman coin, the smallest Roman dimension was called a quadran. Two mites made up a quadran, okay? A quadran was enough money to pay a day laborer about 16 minutes of his day. So that's not very much money, folks. It would pay him about 16 minutes of his day. Day was generally thought of as 12 hours. So mite is real small. You remember the story? Jesus was in the temple there, and he saw these people putting piles of money in, a whole lot of money. And here's this widow. She comes along and she drops two mites into the treasury. And Jesus said that was all of her living. That's all she had. And Jesus said, she has given more than all the rest of them. Why? They gave out of plenty. She gave out of poverty. It isn't the amount. It's what's behind all of that. Folks, it isn't the amount of work that we do. Some of us have time to do a great deal of work. Others do not have that kind of time or that kind of flexibility. Some of us have a lot of ability that we can offer. Others have limited ability. Some have a lot of money that they can give, and others have very, very little. And so what happens a lot of times? Well, he never did give very much anyway. That's not what we need to measure. We need to stop and think, not in terms of what he gives, not in terms of what he has, but in terms of the fact that whatever it is, he or she has been willing to give. And I'm not talking about money now. I'm talking about our work. I'm talking about whatever our contribution to the welfare of the church can be. And some of these things are I hate to use the word, some of these things are very insignificant in the minds of many of us. But they're significant in the mind of God. And so the widow, she had almost no purchasing power, but whatever she had, she was willing to give. Now, let's close with a set of positives and negatives. Sometimes the little things that we do that are negative hurt a whole lot more than we realize. Sometimes a word that is fitly spoken is able to build up. And it needn't be flowery. It needn't be some mighty thing that somebody has done, but just a word of encouragement. On the other hand, a word of discouragement, just a word. You don't have to tell somebody off. You don't have to just really give them down the country like we say. No, but sometimes just a word of discouragement causes a person to sit back and just say, well, what's the use? I tried. No, I didn't produce nearly as much as I wanted to. I didn't produce nearly as much as other people do, but I tried, and nobody appreciated it. They criticized me. They said, well, he didn't do a very good job of that. He didn't finish it, or all kinds of things we can find to criticize. Now, these may be little things, but they hurt people. They discourage people. Now, in families, all of us were children at one time or another. In families, when children are told, you can't, they finally decide, I can't. That's just the way it is. I don't have the ability. I'm not smart enough. I'm not big enough. I don't know enough or whatever, but for some reason I can't. And so children go through their lives sometime and grow up with the idea that Mom and Dad told me I couldn't, I can't, I'm not smart enough, and I guess they're right. And the child would really set out to prove his parents right on these things. There are exceptions to this rule, certainly, but at the same time, discouragement can be very small, but very big. Something else that comes along. I really have trouble with this. I think all preachers have trouble with this. We like to talk, okay? Preachers need to listen. I have a hard time talking. I know other people have a hard time because I say too much. I talk too much. I dominate things too much. And sometimes I have to, when my wife was living, she used to tell me, Jack, you talk too much. You said too much. Let other people say, well, I've got a lot I want to say. Doesn't make any difference. Let other people talk. So sometimes it's very important to listen instead of speaking, and listen instead of talking. And I'll tell you right now, I have a very difficult time with that. I'm doing a little better now that I'm old enough now that I have to stop and think about what I'm going to say. It used to be just out it'd come, Well, I'm doing a little better with that now than I used to. But this is something that we need to stop and think about. On the other hand, some little things that help. Expressing gratitude to other people. Just saying thank you to other people. I had Betty's wife's cousin, my wife's cousin, came in and lived with us for a while she was going to school. And when I would do something for her, many times I would say, thank you, Jane. You did this for me. I didn't do this for you. No, but I appreciate the opportunity to do this. And she would just a young lady in college. But it did make an impression on her because I thanked her for the opportunity to do something for her. Sometimes we need to express gratitude to other people by just saying, I appreciate what you did. I appreciate you. Sometimes by complimenting other people. We don't have to be flowery in what we compliment people on. It doesn't have to be a great big thing. But just to go and compliment people and just say, I found out that you did so-and-so. I want you to know we really appreciate that, and I think it was really a fine thing for you to do. It may have been something very, very small, but that helps us in our relationships with one another. I kind of hate to say this. I was preaching at a congregation one time, and one of the teachers of children's classes, one of the teachers told me this story. She said, Jack, I have been teaching. She was unmarried. She didn't have family responsibilities. She says, I've been teaching for years in the congregation. There's a congregation of about 300 people. She says, I've been teaching for years in the congregation, and just the other day, one of the elders came to me and said, Eva, we really appreciate what you've done in your teaching. She said, Jack, I cried. She said, that's the first time that an elder has ever said to me, we appreciate what you're doing. It meant so much to her when it finally came along. But you stop and ask yourself the question, why did it take so long? Why can't we compliment people and encourage people all along the way? And then finally, one of the things that I think is important, speak to strangers. When people come in this morning, for example, and we have people who haven't been here for some time. We had some people present this morning who had not been here for a good while. To go to these people and say, hey, John, George, Pete, Susie, whatever that name is, I really missed you. I'm really glad to see you. I hope we'll get to see you regularly. Something like this without telling them, where have you been? Why haven't you been here? No, people don't need scolding. They need encouraging. And sometimes just to speak to a person you haven't spoken to in a long time makes a real difference. Who has despised the day of small things? Despise is kind of a strong word here, but the whole thing is that the neglect of little things turns out to be the neglect of big things, because there's so many good things that can come from just a kind word that is fitly spoken. We're going to sing an invitation song. If you are in any way subject to the invitation of Christ, we invite you to come. Let's stand together, please.